This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your dreaming of natural light host, Madelyn.
I'm your, I could have natural light if I wanted to, but people would see me host, Emma.
And welcome to a side quest edition of Talk This. What does natural light have to do with anything, you
Nothing.
ask? That's not true. I thought it was, like, sort of semi-relevant.
I guess so. Isn't that more like you're just looking out through the bars of your quarantine prison?
I mean, you're absolutely right. That it's also that. It's also that I'm coming to you live from jail.
No, you're not.
I'm not. It's not that easy to talk to people who are in prisons. So it's a bad thing and you should research it, but anyway.
She's there with her mice friends.
Oh boy, yes. I think I found a lucky emblem.
So if you hear any suspicious squeaking or justifications for leaving someone in the darkness for a decade, that's the mice.
Yeah, the scratching around isn't the problem so much as the constant gaslighting.
Anyway.
Who cares about the poop they're leaving around?
None of that is what we're talking about today.
But they're bad friends.
It's a side quest episode.
So this week, it's Emma's choice to pick our side quest topic. So Emma, what gaming idea, questions, concepts are we going to be talking about this time?
Well, this time we're going to be talking about games as escapism. So first off, stuff like, what is escapism? What does it mean if something is escapist? Is there ways that games are particularly escapist when compared to other forms of media that people might call all media some form of escapism, right? And how is that, a good thing or a bad thing or both? Especially now.
Especially now.
Yeah.
So you might remember that way back in either the end of March or early April, I didn't actually look at when this episode went live.
I think it was one of your first choices.
No, because this has been going on way longer than that. It was a quarantine thing, but...
Oh yeah, I guess so. Maybe you did something similar. It just sounds familiar.
Anyway, way back in late March, early April, in the Tiger King era of quarantine. Remember Tiger King? I didn't even ever watch it, but
I remember it existing. I still don't really know what it is because I just wasn't interested.
It's not how Emma prefers to escape from her life.
No.
But way back in those early days, you might remember that we did a side quest on games and social connection, which was our way of sidestepping all of the articles that were like, what games should you play in quarantine?
Mm-hmm.
And talking about it from a bigger picture perspective. And, well, that one was specifically about finding ways to connect to people that exist in the real world or, are strengthen those real-world social connections in a lot of ways. I think that this dives more into, yes, the ways games help us connect as well, but also the way games help us hide away.
Man, the whole boom of Fall Guys would have been really interesting for that episode.
What do you mean? In what way?
Just that how, successful they've been is partially probably because everybody's looking for a new game to play with their friends, right?
I hear that. I do wish that they would implement a system that allowed me to immediately view my friend when I finish and I'm in spectator mode, as opposed to having to page through everybody else when you're not as good as your sister at games.
I used up all of my luck on our play session together, so...
Well, I'll take that as the small consolation that it is.
Anyway, that's a side note, because Fall Guys is not escapism. Fall Guys is a harrowing look into the true nature of humanity.
Fall Guys is the rat race personified, not just because rats are on my mind.
But yeah, escapism is more about, yeah, like you said, finding escape in made-up or fictional characters and places and events.
And it's a word that gets thrown around at gaming a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of that is because, like, I mean, when I think of escapism, I also think about the idea of, like, the power fantasy, right?
Mm-hmm.
In, like, there's a story, and the main character is just this super cool dude, you know, who, like, gets all the powers, and maybe he's misunderstood by the people around him, but really, they're the ones who are wrong, and he's just super cool, right? I'm using the pronoun specifically here, as the stereotypical power fantasy. And there are definitely, like, you know, TV shows and movies like that, but in video games, you're not just supposed to, like, see yourself in the main character, right? You are that main character, that super cool dude, right, who does the super cool dude things. So that, like, really is, it feeds in, it's really, what's the word? Complementary to the idea of the power fantasy. It works well with it, right? Because you want to give your player power, so you end up sort of leaning into that aesthetic sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. And side note, there's a whole other side quest to be had about player identification.
Sure.
And what it means, like, to be the character in the game.
Yeah.
But it's certainly true that in most of the discourse, and to be honest, at least anecdotally, in how people play games, most people do identify with the character that they play. Whether or not that's something that games will find fun ways to shake off in interesting ways, continuing to move forward into the next generation, remains to be seen. But it's certainly something that games do uniquely well, even if they have the opportunity to not do it.
Yeah.
I did a little bit of research into... Now, I always think that studies about video games, they're like psych studies most of the time.
Yeah.
Right? So take all of this with these are kind of BS studies, grain of salt that they are. Right? But I read about, there was this kind of survey that was going around. This one much more informal. This is not even really a study, which is fine. I mean, it is a study. It's a survey-based study, but just kind of internet-based. Where you could kind of answer a bunch of questions about what you enjoy about games and why you play games and your preferences and your habits. And at the end, it would make kind of a profile for you about what it is that you value in games. And they took all of that data and aggregated it into the top 10 reasons that people play games. And there were a lot of these in these top 10 that seem really relevant to the escapism idea that is kind of constantly linked to why people play games. So top of the list, number one reason people play games is for immersion, which obviously is a huge part of a kind of successful trying to escape everything experience. Mm-hmm. There's stuff in here like gameplay. There's a weird thing, like apparently people really value the ability to relive or anticipate history. That was top 3. I think there's an escapist point to that, but it was a weird thing, and it was something that the survey runners were also surprised to see as part of it. But other things that feel relevant to this conversation that we have are number 4 is freedom. Being able to move around with very few restrictions in a lenient environment.
Sure.
Number 8 is progression, which to me, I think, is a big part of games that I find escapist.
Sure.
Is the ability to check things off of to-do lists. That's a peek into my psychological profile right there, as if you didn't already know that about me, listeners. But there you go. And then perhaps most relevant at 9 and 10 were oblivion, which, like, yikes, what a gamer way to describe this.
Yeah.
Like, what a word to pick. But oblivion, which they define as helps to forget the hustle and bustle of daily life, to empty your mind, to think about something else.
Sure.
Which normal people might define as escapism. Or you might choose oblivion if you're feeling really edgelord about it.
Okay, I was wrong. This isn't an episode about games as escapism. This is an episode of games as oblivion.
And then number 10 is incarnation, which again...
What are these words?
Incarnation means possibility to embody someone or something else. The focus is on the pragmatic part of the role, its possibility of action, like tanking, healing,
See,
damage
I feel
dealing,
like all these
casting
words
magic
are
spells.
confusing their survey responders. Like, why would they not just put the definition there as something to check off?
I don't think that the survey asks you to rank these exact things in this exact way.
Okay. They just came up with that for the study. They're like, what can we call this one? I know, oblivion.
But I think together, oblivion and incarnation and immersion in particular have a lot to do with what makes games uniquely escapist.
Sure.
And it was interesting to me that all of these things turned up so close. This was all on a 5-point scale, I believe, immersion, and it had a 4.41. Incarnation at the bottom of this top 10 had a 3.95. So these are a big part of why people play games.
Yeah. I mean, I think that maybe Oblivion is maybe not specifically unique to games, but I would think that the other two are perhaps definitely enhanced by the fact that you're playing it. Because you can definitely turn on a TV show and turn your brain off the same way, right?
That's something that I find... So, all of us understand the concept of watching something or playing something to turn your brain off.
I think we've talked about this before somewhere or multiple times, right? Like, I don't really understand it either. I think it's good to have your brain on. But in terms of, like, the distraction element, right?
But it's just so weird.
When I don't want to think about something, I'll turn on a TV show so I can think about the TV show, right?
Right, and it's something that I feel like, especially when I'm, like, at home and chilling, not at home in New York, at home at Talk This VA HQ, that I really enjoy, because there we have at least sort of cable television, and here I don't have any television. Mm-hmm. That, man, I find myself watching a lot more, like blah sitcoms, just because they're on television, and it's, like, kind of nice to have something on.
See... But is that because you want to turn something on, or is it because we can't start anything because we can't watch anything together at this point?
I guess that's possible.
Right? Like, is it because we really like those sitcoms, or is it because we literally can't watch anything else?
I hear that, but, like, okay, so we watched, well, Emma and I guess I can continue to now reveal because my quarantine time is over.
Yeah.
Well, Emma and I were at home in Virginia a couple of weeks ago. More than 14 days ago. That's what's relevant. Thank you, Health Authority, listening. We watched, like, 5 episodes of the British Total Wipeout.
Yeah.
It's like, what did we enjoy about... Did we enjoy that show? Or was it just a mindless thing?
Hey, I enjoyed it. I got invested into the narrative, right?
It's true.
There were some dumb sexists on that show, and it was soul-crushing when they won.
But I do sometimes wonder if sometimes describing something as mindless is more of a shame reaction than anything else. Like, one of the games games like Candy Crush, for example,
sure, are
often games that I feel like I hear people describe as, they're mindless. I use it to turn my brain off, right?
Yeah.
Which... That, like, I get that, because I do it too, but it's really hard to define what that is. Because there's also something really addictive about games like Candy Crush, and, like, strategy-based about games like Candy Crush, and so of course you aren't turning your brain off.
I think more when people say mindless, I think it's... In some cases, it might be they're just staring at it, right? And it's autopilot or whatever. But I think it's more distracting. Right, like, I might pull out Candy Crush when I'm... this is funny because I'll never take the T again, but when I'm on my way home from work on the T, and it's really crowded, and it's a long ride, right? Because I don't want to deal with, like, the people talking all around me and being distracted by the weird smell in the car or whatever. I'm just gonna play Candy Crush because it gives me something to focus on that isn't, my external surroundings. So I'm turning my mind off to certain things that are around me in order to focus on one thing. So interestingly, I think there's an argument to be made that when people say mindless, they mean my mind is actually only focused on this thing.
Yeah. As opposed to mindless, it's like I'm hyper-focused.
Yeah.
Just not on the things that stress me out.
Yeah.
I really, again, in the subway era, I used to really enjoy when I would be next to someone who was playing a game. Because I just, like, mostly don't do phone games on principle, nothing against them. I just, like, my phone, like, I have an iPhone SE, so, like, I don't have the storage space or the screen size. And, like, for a long time, my screen, like, wasn't calibrated quite right because I had a case. Mm-hmm. So it was just it's not something that I've gotten into. But, like, I love watching other people play phone games on the subway. It's like, it's great. It's like, even more mindless because I just get to watch them. I don't even have to, like, the stress is like, one step removed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
That is interesting, though. I mean, because I think you're right that there are kind of 2 degrees of mindless. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just not wanting to admit that I get hyper-focused on late-night reruns of Modern Family. Like, that's what I mean by maybe some of it is shame-based. Maybe it's just that, like, that's not something that I want to put out there about myself. But it feels like there are two different things there that get grouped into one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Going back to all these studies that people have done on video games, you see a lot of ones that, like, contrast each other, right? Like, there are studies that are like, people who play games are happier, or people who play games are more prone to depression, or they get gooder grades. Gooder. Clearly that's not
Which
true.
Which category does Emma fall in?
They get better grades, or they get worse grades. You know what? It's not my fault. It's the English language fault, okay? It should be gooder.
Okay.
How did we get to good, better, best, anyway? Where did that come from?
I do think that, in Latin it's not the same, but I do think that good, better, and best change in meaningful root ways. Even in Latin.
Maybe. Anyway, that's not the point. So I was reading an interview with Jane McGonigal, who's that lady who does all the gamification stuff, like Super Better and stuff like that.
Oh, right.
And one of the theories, like thoughts that she posited on why all these studies end up with different results is that they're looking at people who play games for different reasons, right? And she separated it into self-suppression versus self-expansion, which is basically like people who are playing games to avoid things versus people who are playing games to experience and enjoy them, right? So people who are playing games for maybe some other reason than just their fun, and people who are playing games because they want to play the game, right? Which I thought was, there wasn't really anything behind that, but I thought that was an interesting way to think about it a little bit, right? Like, it does in some ways come down to the reason that you're doing things, right? Like anything that can be addictive or destructive, right? It's how much are you doing it and why are you doing it, right?
So that tracked with a couple of Scandinavian studies that I read about games as escapism. Because even though we talk proudly sometimes, perhaps, about things being escapes for us or being escapist, and that could even be a positive thing associated with a game, there's also a sense in which games as escapism, particularly outside of the gaming community, feels like can feel like a negative thing and plays into the stereotype of the gamer who doesn't know how to interact in the real world and lives in their parents' basements,
right? And
like doesn't see the sun,
right? And
only talks on I'm trying to make up like a fake MMO World of Fortnite with their friends. Do I sound Gen X yet? Anyway, so in these couple of studies, one of them compared esports players to recreational games players, and found that while obviously the two groups have different kind of psychosocial motivations for playing the games, that both groups, when their intense immersion in the activity is tied to escapism, had a higher risk of developing at least the behaviors associated with internet gaming disorder. Now, internet gaming disorder, right, but...
I mean, I ultimately think that is just like any form of addiction to anything, right?
Yeah.
If it's helpful to put it in its own category, then that's helpful, but, yeah.
And then also, well, okay, so here's a quote from that study from, I'm sorry, I can chat you this guy's name and you can try to do it. It's very...
Why would I know how to pronounce Scandinavian names?
This guy teaches in Budapest.
Why would I need to know how to... Where is Budapest again?
In Hungary.
Hungary, that's right. How would I know how to pronounce... Why are you making me do it? Zsolt Dimitrovics. Yeah, sure.
I'm so sorry, my dude.
I'm sure it's something like Dimitrovics.
I don't know how to deal with the ZS at the beginning. Anyway, his quote is, "Previous research has linked escapism to psychiatric distress and gaming disorder in recreational gamers. While esport gamers have many positive motivators like skill development, our study found that excessive immersion by some individuals can indicate mental health issues." And then in another study out of Norway, though, they were kind of studying how gaming was associated with procrastination, which, like, too targeted, fellas.
Yeah.
And they did find a weak but positive association between procrastination and hours spent playing video games. However, what they did find most strongly is that for gamers who, when asked why they play, answered to escape reality and to reduce stress, those gamers had more problems with procrastination than those who play for entertainment, reward, or social reasons.
Yeah.
So I feel like that ties in exactly with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Is that escapism, there's not really anything wrong with it as long as you're not letting it get out of hand, or it's not the only reason that you're playing for an extended period of time.
Yeah. Which, again, I don't think is to say that, like, playing games when you're upset or stressed is necessarily a bad thing.
Well, you have to do something when you're upset or stressed,
yeah.
right?
Like, if you just fixate on the thing that you're upset and stressed about, like, I mean, depending on what it is, I guess, but you're not gonna fix anything like that, right? You're just gonna wind yourself in circles. But it comes down to, again, like, how much you're doing it, right? If you are upset and stressed enough all the time, and then you're using games as a way to get away from that upset and stress, maybe you have an underlying issue that you should see somebody about.
So the question then becomes, so a lot of the stuff that I read that was kind of negative towards escapism as a motivating factor for games came back to the idea that you're getting too much from games when you should be getting some of it from real life.
Yeah.
Right? You're using games to take the place of things that it would be healthier for you to be getting, mostly at least, from real world. I mean, real world in heavy quotes, right? But real world interactions.
Yeah.
So that brings us to here, August 2020, where the real world, for at least many of us, not for all of us, whatever. I'm in New York City. Our positive rate is below 1%, so I probably could eat at a restaurant if I wanted to, and that would be fine.
Uh-huh.
But for many of us, right, our real world has shrunk considerably.
Hey, you can go see a movie for 15 cents.
Don't think movie theaters are open here yet, but
15
still wouldn't
cents to go
imagine.
Die.
A cheap price. What does an electric chair cost?
Just enough to carry you across the river Styx, you know?
Oof, buddy. Yikes. Dark humor is escapism. The next topic. But it brings us to now, where even if you were to say, yeah, it would be healthier if I was like talking to friends in person, or doing more than just like walking around the neighborhood looking at people with my masked face.
Yeah.
Right? That when so many of these outlets for other social interactions are gone, and other just outlets for any number of things that you get out of games are gone. Is it less unhealthy to be relying on games now? Is it even more unhealthy?
I mean, interestingly enough, I feel like I have actually gotten more social interaction recently in quarantine, at least from, like, we talk to our family a lot more.
Yeah, that's very true.
Just because people want to talk to people, I guess. Do I talk to my coworkers less, probably, but I still talk to them enough. But it does feel like I'm still getting some social interaction that maybe I wouldn't have gotten if this wasn't going on. So there is that.
But it's all digital, too. I mean, there's that.
I suppose. I don't think either of us looked this up, but I'd be interested to know if there's any studies on, like, if talking to someone face-to-face in person or face-to-face over video call has any functional difference on how you perceive it, you know?
If there aren't any studies on that yet, you can bet that folks are scrambling for some grant money to run that now.
It's a good idea. I'm interested. I'm interested to know.
Yeah. That was not a judgment. That was just a, man, like, hope somebody's got a grant for that study, because I would also like to know.
But at the same time, did I download the free trial version of Final Fantasy XIV on my PlayStation 4 this week?
Oh, no, Emma.
I sure did.
No.
They added all of Heavensward onto it, so I can play all of Realm Reborn and all of Heavensward before I have to pay for anything.
Oh, no.
So that's there now.
We've lost her.
But would I have even considered doing that if I wasn't stuck at home all the time? Maybe, but I think it would have been less likely.
Well, okay, so one thing that's interesting about that, so it's like, the way we're talking to everyone, it's like voice chat or phone calls or whatever, or you're talking to Clickbait Boyfriend 20 million hours a day. That's my one in-person interaction. And does that even really count as talking to someone else anymore? Not really. It's really mostly like talking to myself. Anyway, but it's because everything is over the phone or over the phone plus, basically.
Yeah.
And so how is that so like, it doesn't seem like that kind of social interaction should be so different from talking to friends over voice chat in Fortnite or in any number of games that you could do that.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
But I guess in that case, I don't know, can you really still say you're playing something so much for escapism if you're playing it alongside real-world friends?
You're just escapisming together.
But, like
if you're like a squad, like you're talking about like all your strategies, like pretending you're some big-time esports team, There's a form of escapism in that.
I hear that. I really do, but I think having that tether to actual relationships, not to say that relationships formed online can't be actual relationships, right? But in the context of sort of this research, right?
Yeah.
Having that tether to a real world relationship, a real world, I don't know, something to hang on to, necessarily means that you're playing the game also for social reasons. And even if you're also using it as a stress relief thing or to escape from having to think about the homework that you're not doing.
Sure.
Or what have you. Like, it feels like that must insulate you to some extent from the kind of harmful immersion that is talked about.
That's fair. I started this out mentioning the power fantasy, right? But I was also thinking about how, like, I mean, in every media, but I think especially in games, like, that's not, like, the only form of escapism, right? Like, sometimes you're not, I think you touched on this earlier, too, but sometimes you're not escaping into, like, Happy Land or whatever, right? Sometimes you just want, like, your tasks in front of you, right? Or, like, some sort of motivation within the game. Like, even playing something like The Last of Us or The Last of Us Part 2, which are, especially the second one, are pretty heavy games, are kind of, like, soothing in their own way, right? Like, that's a particular escapist fantasy as well, alongside, like, the standard power fantasy of, like, the apocalypse fantasy where, you know, like, you're one of the last survivors, right? Like, that's part of the reason there are those people who, like, prepare for the apocalypse, right? Is the idea of this fantasy. And I think a lot of games use that, too, which is interesting.
Well, you know, in any kind of variety of that, right? I mean, okay, I promise I'm not going to talk about Animal Crossing too much, right? But, like, Animal Crossing is, like, the big escapist game of this moment, right? And I'll say personally, man, okay, so it's been a wild week here with Mickey and Minnie and their friends. And when I finally had time to return to my Animal Crossing island 2 days ago, oh my god, it was such a relief. It felt like they were welcoming me back, too. The neighbors, I got 2 neighbor pictures in one day. It was like, finally. But it was a relief. It was like, oh, I'm back somewhere familiar, where I have familiar tasks, and I don't have to... The only mice, well, there aren't any mice on my island, but the only mice are my neighbors.
Yeah.
And my mice neighbors here are not as kind and chatty and open to gifts.
I mean, and Animal Crossing is an interesting example, too, because, like, theoretically breaking it down, it's just about, like, living your life with friends, you know, lots of neighbors you have to talk to, and a house that you have to move stuff into, and a loan you have to pay off, right? Like, if you put it down to that, it sounds, like, awful. Like, in real life, if maybe you don't like your neighbors, but they insist on talking to you anyway, right? Or your neighbors want things from you that you have to take care of for them. Whereas your Animal Crossing neighbors are just always happy to see you, basically. And yeah, you have a loan to pay off, but Tom Nook doesn't hassle you about it ever, and you don't get any interest on it. It's just there for you to pay off when you want.
Well, I think the power fantasy game takes this to an extreme. But I think what can be satisfying as an escape in games is this, not illusion, right? I'm going to use the word illusion, but not exactly illusion. This illusion of competence.
Yeah.
Like, in Animal Crossing, the things that are asked of you are reasonable, and you can set your own goals, and it is not, like, there's nothing hard about Animal Crossing unless you've decided to figure out a way to make the game, like, hard for yourself by rules that you've set yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's satisfying about many games is just the rush of, like, leveling up your character, or of catching a new Pokemon, or of, being the super strong dude who can level all the buildings.
Sure,
right?
yeah.
That idea of feeling like you are good at something. Or, you know, in the case of games that are like, you know, difficulty-based games, like Dark Souls, or, like, something like Celeste, right?
Yeah, you've mastered it, right?
Exactly. So you get to feel like you've been... Something that's helpful for me in games that feel like stress relief for me is games that give me the illusion, in this case I do genuinely mean illusion, of productivity. Especially during times where I'm not feeling motivated to be productive in my actual life.
Yeah, I mean, when I was playing The Last of Us Part 2, like, there's a lot of really satisfying parts to it of, like, stealthing your way through an entire section, right? That felt really good. Or, like, when I would throw a Molotov and set the infected and the human enemies against each other and then pick off the stragglers, you're like, hell yeah, I'm very cool. And you feel very smart doing stuff like that, too.
And those moments in the real world are so rare. And I don't mean that in the sense of the moments that you are throwing Molotov cocktails perfectly in the world are so rare. Although, dear listener, I hope for you that they are. I truly do. And if they aren't, I hope I hope you're happy with the choices that you've made for yourself.
Yeah.
But those moments of just like, yes, I did it right.
Yeah.
Or like, yes, I've mastered this. Or yes, this went exactly the way that I wanted it to go. Especially, I mean, maybe this is less true. Maybe once you're, like, an adult with a real career. Not that we both don't have real careers, right? But maybe once you've done something longer than I've done things, it feels you get more of those moments, but I feel like that can't be the case.
I mean, I think the difference is with games, you get immediate feedback from the game on, like, you did something good. Right?
Yeah.
Because you progress past it or you beat the hard boss and you can move on now. Whereas with stuff that maybe you accomplish in your real life, a lot of times, and you can get self-satisfaction from things, of course, but a lot of times something that you're working on has to get the validation of somebody else too, right? Like you're doing a project for work, that's something you have to turn in and present. And even if you feel happy with it, the people you're presenting it to doesn't feel happy with it, right? You don't get that same result. Or maybe you finish like writing something, but like maybe you're satisfied with just that, but if you're submitting it places, right, like you don't get that feeling of accomplishment until it's accepted somewhere, right? And all of that is displaced. Like the action is displaced from the achievement by some period of time, unless you're really procrastinating on it, I guess.
And in games, the struggle is intentional and deliberate.
Yeah.
And part of the joy of it.
Yeah.
And in life, it's the constant opportunity cost of, yeah, maybe eventually I felt good about this.
Yeah.
Or, but was it worth everything that I went through?
Yeah.
Like, was the struggle to get here worth it? As opposed to in games, where you've basically made that contract with the game.
Yeah.
Of, I'm going to struggle, and then you're going to reward me.
Yeah.
Even if that reward is just a dumb chicken head to put on my jelly bean man.
Yes.
You know what? I wish I received more dumb chicken heads to put on my jelly bean head.
Yeah, I feel like you don't level up fast enough in Fall Guys, to be honest.
I know, I want more. I just want endless cosmetics.
Yeah.
In that game. Maybe I just need to be better at it. Maybe I just need to get good.
I mean, that's the thing. You get like half a level if you get to the final round, but then it goes down significantly in experience the less far you get in. So it's very hard to level up unless you're pretty good at it.
Anyway, I feel like this all ties into another thing, and something that Dad was talking about when we were talking about this with him, I guess a couple weeks ago, is the idea of the rules of games being comforting. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is a really kind of a big example of that doesn't necessarily feel like a rule in the same sense of like press A to jump.
Yeah.
But in the rule in the game mostly, and when this is subverted, right, it's intentional and it's to do something to you. The rule in the game is that you go through something hard and then the game says good job in some way, or like you level up or you get to the next level, or those sounded like the identical things, but gamers, you knew what I meant.
Yeah.
Or whatever. You get the next size house.
Yeah. Oh man, I was going to say something. Oh, and in games also you have clearer ideas, at least once you get past the tutorial levels, of what you can and can't do, right? Like, you're operating within rules, not just on, like, a macro level, but of, like, a smaller level as well, of, like, my character can... Here's the weapons my character has, right? Here are the abilities my character has. Cloud does not have the jump materia equipped, so he cannot jump.
Much to Click Boyfriend's endless chagrin.
So, like, you know what you can and can't do, and within that knowledge, you can formulate a plan, right? Whereas sometimes in real life, it's not as clear what you can and can't do, right? Sometimes it's more nebulous, and that time is always a lot more stressful because you have to figure out a course of action without necessarily knowing everything about your abilities or the circumstances or the resources that you have.
Or literally your ability to jump.
Yeah, I don't know if I can jump.
I love American Ninja Warrior, and those people train forever.
Yeah.
And they tank.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
I mean, besides all the injuries that you'd probably receive, there's something appealing about the idea of going on a show like Total Wipeout, right? Because in that moment, you are in a game, right? Like, you have your capabilities as a person, and you have to answer the challenges that they're giving it. And there is that sort of instant gratification to it. Which maybe you can find in just general sports, too, now that I'm thinking about it, but a little bit less, perhaps.
Well, we hate team games, Emma. Team games are the worst.
They are. It's true. I hate it when my team lets me down. They cannot push the ball down the obstacle course.
Sometimes it do be that way, though.
But right, like, watching that, like, there's something, like, I was saying to you when I was doing it, I was like, man, I want to go on Wipeout sometimes. And that's because there's something appealing to it of, like, being faced with all these challenges and you have to overcome them in, like, an immediate sort of way.
Also, with the exception of the big balls on Wipeout, Emma thinks she's got the strategy.
I think I can get past the punching wall. Okay, it's all about the face. It's all about the face.
I'm sure she could do it in reality.
And maybe your knees. It's all about the face and your knees, I think.
Face and knees.
Yeah.
How's your left
the
knee,
abs
by
you
the
just
way?
gotta tighten and tank,
How's your left knee holding up?
It's, it's
Buddha
normal.
knee.
It's fine.
That's good. Glad to hear
My
it.
knees just sort of hurt generally nowadays, instead of one specifically. So I guess that's better.
I suppose so. I think balancing the rules thing, though, is I read this term somewhere, so I won't take credit for coming up with this idea. But games as a means to autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of all together here, coming together.
Yeah.
Not only is there a set number of things that you can do, even if that set number of things is very large, right? For many people, big open world games are very escapist because even though there's a set number of ways you can do things, you get so much choice about what you want to do.
Yeah, if you're Madelyn, you can just run towards the really far mountain in the background and ignore everything else for the mountain.
Me. There are no mountains here. Let me have my escapist. Maybe my escapism, really, if I really embraced it truly and didn't try to make every game a job, would be just running around at random. You never know. But, like, within this set of rules, this idea that you can do it the way you want to do it, which, again, the real world does not provide for you pretty much ever. And if you are in a situation where you have a lot of autonomy in the real world, you are probably also in a situation where you are just flying without a safety net there.
Yeah.
Right? We trade a lot of autonomy for the security of, a lease.
Yeah.
Or a job.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
And Cloud doesn't have to do that.
Yeah, Cloud's just got connections that get him a free apartment.
I know.
Like, it's kind of it's like one room, it's like smaller than your apartment, but it's free, so.
I am hoping, apparently the landlady in the place that we're looking at is a lady, so it's like, will she be that woman? Maybe.
Maybe.
You don't know. She could be.
She could be.
But it's like, it's a weird balance of things here, right? Of what makes something a successful escape. And, it clears up even more kind of why this is really appealing, but also why it can be really bad.
Yeah.
Because if you don't feel like you have any autonomy, or you feel like, or on the flip side, you feel like there's no rules in your life.
Yeah.
Then, or both at the same time. Man, it is really possible to feel both at the same time.
Thanks, Madelyn, for that personal anecdote.
As I was saying it, I was like, wow, I've definitely felt both very trapped, but also very overwhelmed with choice at the same time. And so the world isn't binary. You can feel awful in multiple ways at the same time.
How inspiring.
Which is
Thank you.
also something that can't really happen to you very much outside of that. Your Pokemon cannot be paralyzed and asleep at the same time. They can only feel bad in one way.
That's true.
Anyway, my point being, it feels to me, like, to be honest, it feels to me like seeking games as escapism isn't the thing. Like, the problem is the situations in your life that caused you to seek this, not really that you're continuing to seek it. Although, of course, it can become a crutch.
Yeah. I mean, I was reading a New York Times article about playing video games now in the social distancing time. And they were saying that it can be a useful structure substitute for people who, like, don't have jobs right now, right? Like, because it simulates in some ways what a job is, right? Like, you get tasks and you complete them, right? Like, it gives you some simulacrum of structure. And I was thinking about last summer.
I was going to ask you about this.
Where I was playing a lot of Fire Emblem. And, like, I mean, talk about, like, a replacement for college, right?
Yeah, right? A job simulator, college simulator.
Yeah, especially since I did a little bit of TAing while I was there. It's just like, man, yeah, this is just college, but with war, man. But, like, the only other thing, well, I was doing the podcast, of course, as well, but the only other thing I was doing during that time was job applications, and job applications are just soul-crushing.
They're
right?
the worst.
Like, it is not, well, maybe it's possible for somebody, in which case I salute you, but it's not possible to just sit down on a day and spend your entire day doing job applications.
Well, unless they're really soulless, right? I could see, if I really didn't have to edit my cover letter, I could see being able to send, but that's not how it is. That's
just not how it works. At least, maybe it depends on your industry too, but at least in the jobs I was applying to, that's not just how it worked. So, like, I would have a goal of, like, what I needed to do for jobs for the day, but that would only take up, like, 2 to 3 hours of my life, right? And Fire Emblem was a good way to fill that time and feel productive, right? Like, I felt like I was really, like, I felt like I was making accomplishments, and it served as somewhat of a good substitute when adding something, where maybe adding something like a class or something like that would have just made me implode, right? Like, there's something to be said for taking on too much that requires you to be working for yourself, I guess. Does that make sense?
I don't know what you're talking about. That doesn't. I've never done that.
I mean, it reminded me also of, like doing theater in high school, when I would do that much for myself, like my sophomore and junior year. And that resulted in my senior year where I was just totally burnt out on, like, everything. Because I had spent so much of my life, like, working on things without really taking a lot of time for myself. Which is why I think that, like, you know, everything in large amounts is harmful, but a certain amount of time spent engaging in escapism is not 100% a bad thing, because if you just suffocate yourself with work and the world and all the things you should be doing, like, you don't get anything done. You just sit there sort of staring into space.
Yeah, like, of course it would be dope to have a life that you never ever felt any desire to have any distance from.
Yeah.
Right? But, like, that's not, like, as much as we want to, like, dream that that's a possibility, I think, you know, even if you have that life, that's not, like, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, that whole, like, saying of, like, find a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life is just, like, if someone's out there who does that, who legitimately feels that way, that's nice, but I think there's maybe, like, 10 of you total in the world. right? Like, even if you love your job, you think your job is amazing, there's gonna be a few days when you just don't want to do it. You know?
Also, it's just like, doing things is hard.
Yeah. It's tiring.
Like, even if you love things, doing things is hard. It's not always hard, but doing things is frequently hard. This is something I remind myself of working in theater all the time, is that sometimes I'm like, wow, this sucks a lot of the time. And I'm like, yeah, but, like, you're working. Like, that is how it is.
Yeah.
And you try to put it in situations where it sucks less. And it's weird for me now to think about, like, will I even be able to go back to the level of hustle I had pre-pandemic, and should I?
Yeah.
Because I've really enjoyed the space to, I mean, like, to be honest, like, craft a life that is more escapist in just, like, what it is.
Yeah.
Escaping from what it was when I was, like, running everywhere at all times. But I do think, so, like, and maybe this is just societal, and, like, we hate video games, right? But, a similar idea is people that get really into books, right?
Yeah.
Who read a lot. And I feel like, at least here in 2020, that's viewed as a lot less dangerous than finding your escapism in games. And maybe that's just, that's how it goes generationally, right? Is that once science fiction was the devil, and now it's Fall Guys. But
I mean, there is a fundamental difference between books and games, just in the amount and breadth of stories that books have that games just can't hope to have, because they've only been around for a certain amount of time and there's only so many of them, right?
Sure.
But and especially the public perception is all the AAA games, right? And within that, there is even less breadth of story a lot of the time. So, of course, like, there's this thought of, like, as long as you're reading the right books, right? And there's more right books than there are right games in the public perception, I think.
I would say, though, even culturally, like, to me, there doesn't feel like, I mean, maybe there is, in that games can be even more readily become something that you become reliant on, right? But, like, culturally, binging a television show, right?
Yeah.
Is, like, it's cool.
Yeah, I don't
right?
understand
like,
how people do that.
Oh, I binged a television show. We used to do it, though. Like, we used to do it in high school more.
I guess. Did we? What did we binge?
Remember when we watched, like, a whole season of Avatar in, like, a day at some point?
Maybe, but that was, like, with friends, wasn't it?
Also with friends. We also did it with friends, but the first time we watched, anyway, because we used to have to go to Blockbuster and we'd, like, get, like, multiple, anyway.
We did not get DVDs of Avatar from Blockbuster.
Maybe not of not of Avatar, but we did get DVDs of, like, maybe The Office from Blockbuster.
Maybe.
Anyway, putting that aside, binging a television show is socially acceptable. Even though, I mean, speaking of The Office, right? For how many people is and I read a good article, I think from Emily Vanderwerth, about this, about how, like, The Office is really appealing to a wide variety of people for many of the reasons that we talked about video games being appealing, like the rules of it and the things of it that are not real.
Yeah.
Right? The coworkers that you hate but that you still get along with. Yeah. And the stable job that supports you, even if it's not something you love. Like, it's socially acceptable to have watched The Office 30 times.
Yeah.
Sort of. At least among many circles. It's not socially acceptable to say I play 10 hours of video games a day.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting how even when the behaviors are perhaps equally unhealthy, that not to say that binge watching is necessarily in the same way as using games as an escape is not necessarily unhealthy, right? But it's interesting how, like, watching a lot of films or binging a show or reading a lot of books it doesn't get the same kind of criticism or scrutiny that...
I mean, I do think ultimately that's a generational thing, right? Like,
No,
you go back and everybody has their own... The youth are being ruined by this new bogeyman, you know?
Yeah.
So next up, in another, 30 years, we'll have another form of entertainment that we can get scared about, VR chat.
Maybe. Unless the studies show it's just as good. One other thing you mentioned in the notes is, like, the gamification of life.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking a little bit about, I thought you would bring up, and I had been thinking about, like, games as, like, people want that motivation, right? Like, that checklist of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's, like, the core idea behind a lot of gamification, is that people really like that, and it helps them. And so if you can somehow apply that structure to real-world activities, right, it helps you do things when perhaps you're feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
We used to go to the gym. When was
Remember
that?
gyms?
Was it in high school, or was it sometime when I was back
it was
from
a couple
college?
summers ago.
Yeah, I don't remember.
I guess it couldn't have been a couple summers ago. I've lived here way longer than I think I've lived here now.
Yeah.
But it was like 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah,
I don't swim.
I don't quite remember. Might have been when we were both in college or something.
That sounds plausible.
But we went to the gym, and I used to run on the treadmill or the stepper, the elliptical or whatever.
The stair stepper.
The stair stepper, yeah. With the Zombies Run in the background. Because then I was like, yeah, I'm running to something. Or running is a strong word. I was, walking or jogging. Or stair stepping. In that, like, in the same way that Candy Crush might distract me from the people around me on the T, the Zombies Run that I was listening to distracted me from how much I hate running. Yes. And we also used Habitica for a while. And I still go back to that every once in a while when I'm feeling like I have a lot of things that I just need to keep track of. So that's still helpful for me in terms of, like, you have a character, and every time you complete a habit or a task, you get experience for that character.
I still have it on my phone. I haven't used it in years, but I have it just in case. I'm like, I liked Habitica a lot for a long time. And
I use it, like, on and off now. Like, when I feel like I have a lot of tasks, I might turn it back on for a little bit. Last time I checked, we're on some quest. The dragon has, like, 75 hit points left or something.
I've been afraid to open mine because I'm like, I haven't opened it in years. My streak.
I think you're sleeping in the inn.
Okay, that's
time
good.
I checked.
Thank God I put myself to sleep for that.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. But stuff like that is helpful for when you think there's too much stuff to do, right? Like any sort of to-do list, except it has, like, a cute character in it.
Yeah. Anything that, it's like almost the anti-escapism, right?
Yeah.
It gives you a little bit of what you get from those kinds of experiences, but in a way that hopefully encourages you to engage outside of like an enclosed world.
Yeah, I think people have figured out good ways to apply that to just day-to-day living, but gamification, like education and stuff, still has a while to go before I will consider it really effective.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you there. Well, Emma, any closing thoughts on escapism?
Well, one of the last thoughts I was thinking about is also in that Jane McGonigal interview. I don't remember what the context was anymore, but she brought up, like, Snow World, which is, like, this somewhat famous games for change that burn victims can play, and it will reduce the pain of their burns by a pretty significant amount. It's just like you're in a snowy wonderland, basically. But it's been shown to help burn victims a lot. And I was thinking about that, like, if you really think about that, that's a way to say that that's escapism, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's
you
wild.
Are escaping from the pain of your own body. But that's a obviously pretty unambiguously positive application of escapism, that you can say, like, yeah, they're ignoring certain problems that they're having, but, if we're treating their burns right now, maybe that's something that they should be doing anyway.
And I think that maybe there's an analogy to be made to mental health there as well. That, as long as you're getting the treatment that you need, that there's not really anything wrong with things that reduce your pain. And if that's, I don't know, whatever it is, if that's playing Stardew Valley, if that's...
I will never understand you. Who plays Stardew Valley to reduce their pain? Stardew Valley makes my stress levels skyrocket.
Whatever. If that's your Jelly Bean Man, if that's, watching Fortnite's bizarre parodies of decades old...
Oh my god. Oh man, I almost consider it as like, maybe that should be the side quest topic, but then I was like, do I want to talk about that? No. So...
It'll probably still be a thing in 4 weeks.
Oh yeah, it'll be a thing for a while. I mean, lawsuits like this take a very long time.
Well, I hope the folks on the legal teams at Epic and Apple have some good games to go to when Twitter gets stressful. Well, folks, thanks for escaping into another episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
We've been your hosts. Did you feel, listeners, like the natural light intro at the beginning was relevant? I thought it was. I sometimes play games for the experience of being out of doors.
That's true.
Sometimes when my character is swimming in the ocean in Animal Crossing, I can almost imagine that I am on a beach in Miami, swimming in the ocean. A place that I would not want to be right now. But listeners, what games do you use as escapism? Have you found a healthy way to balance the desire to get some distance from your normal life with the necessary engagement that you need to continue with that life? Have you ever taken it too far? How do we convince Emma that Stardew Valley isn't that stressful and she just needs to chill the F out?
I don't like time. I don't like when time is passing.
Yikes. Too much Jukebox the Ghost for Emma. Well, listeners, hit us up on social media for answers and thoughts on all that and more. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast, where you can see some of our thoughts on games, keep up to date with the latest happenings on the show. On YouTube, you can, of course, check out Play This and On Topic Corner, Emma's 2 video series. Mm-hmm. They're really good. There's some good videos there. So if you're tired of games as escapism and instead you're escaping into a YouTube rabbit hole, which I think gets almost as much scorn as games, even though it's basically television, except with more Nazis. Yeah. Not on our channel, though. Check out Talk This Sisters. It's Talk This Podcast now, but it used to be Talk This Sisters. Check out Talk This Podcast.
I was thinking of putting, I'm trying to use non-Adobe platforms to learn them right now. So I was thinking about putting together a little montage of some of our Fall Guys highlights using my new open source video platform that I downloaded. So
we'll have to play again tomorrow.
Yes. So maybe that will be up sometime soon.
Excellent. Well, look forward to that because Fall Guys highlights are a delight. I hope you got the Chicken Man.
I did.
Thank goodness, because I want to see him in person. Anyway, if you want more Talk This content, you should check out our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read more about the show, see the games that are in the hat, see Emma's new little website updates.
Oh, yeah.
White text, everybody.
Yeah.
More readable. Get excited. And see the blog, where you can read long-running series that I swear to anything that I'm going to finish.
You've been saying this for 2 months now.
I'm sorry. This week I produced a big Zoom theater show and we've caught 4 mice and I've been looking for apartments. Please, I promise I'll finish Clickbait Boyfriend.
It's okay.
It's coming. Potato Yozora will see the light of day.
Thank God.
Anyway, that's where my boyfriend is playing Kingdom Hearts. You know this, I say it every episode. And also Split Screen, that does actually have a new update. where Emma and I are watching Coffee Prince and My Hero Academia.
Also, something I'm slowly adding to the split screen is I'm going back, and at the bottom I'm adding a previous, first, next buttons so that you'll actually be able to effectively navigate our series.
So if you opted for television binge as your escapism of choice, man, Boys Over Flowers, My Hero Academia, and speaking of pain relief escapism, My Hero Academia and Coffee Prince are all excellent choices.
Yes.
For that. Let's see. I've gotten so distracted from my spiel. The most important part. Of course, if you love the show, or you like the show, or you enjoy not thinking about your problems for an hour-ish with us each week, you should subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora, Overcast, Pocket Cast, anywhere that you can find podcasts, you can find Talk This. So never miss an episode on Sundays at noon.
Mm-hmm.
Emma, what will the people not be missing next week?
We're talking about Oddworld as our old game and Disco Elysium as our new game. So I gotta get back to that.
So get ready to get funky, people. At the Odd Disco.
Exactly.
2s, 4s, 6s, 8s, and 0s. Not allowed. That was a math joke.
Very funny.
Thanks, Emma. See, you get a bonus joke even on the weeks I don't tell. That's the kind of joke you can expect. The Odd Disco. Dang it, I should have saved that. Oh, I could have crafted that.
It's too late.
Boy. Oh, man.
You've used it up.
Anyway, check that out next week. In 2 weeks, can you believe it's been 6 weeks again? I can't. In 2 weeks, you get our third set, our 3 for 3 side quest, which is where Emma and I talk about what we've been playing the last 6 weeks.
Yes.
So you can bet there'll be some Fall Guys in there if you're desperate for Fall Guys content. Thank goodness that music wasn't recognizable, because I don't think you're allowed to do that. Like, I don't know what that is.
I feel like I get the part where they the voices start singing stuck in my head, but I can just remember what the voice sounds like. I don't actually remember what the melody is.
Well,
it's like blah chicka pa or something.
Folks, on that blah chicka pa note, Emma, do you wanna say goodbye?
This week, I hope that you can escape from your problems.
It really took you a long time to come up with, like, the most obvious send-off.